We get started with this episode of FinServ Tech Oracles. I am Johna Till Johnson. I am here with my oracular colleague, Jerry Murphy, to share our thoughts on technology for financial services firms. For this episode, Jerry, you wanted to talk about the threat of AI deepfakes and the threat that they pose to financial services firms. First of all, let's just do some definitions. What is a deepfake? What are you referring to when you talk about deepfakes?
Well, when I say deepfake, and I think mostly what the industry talks about is when you have a video or audio recording of something that's going on that is indistinguishable from reality. And that you can see, I think there's been things in the press where you have, uh, you know, Elvis Presley looking like Elvis Presley, but he's singing an Ariana Grande song or something like that, right? So it's like obviously it's not him, but it sure as heck looks like him and sure as heck sounds like him. But there's obviously no way he would have been singing an Ariana Grande song. So something like that, where it's scary, especially when you look at financial services, is these deep fakes are getting really good, especially at doing audio and voice deep fakes. And so um, you can see where there's going to be much more plausible scams on where it's a grandmother who gets a call from what she thinks is her grandson saying, "Hey, I'm stuck in Italy and I need you to send me some money," where it's you it's going to sound like your grandson, absolutely, and it's going to be a lot tougher to distinguish. And of course, any financial institution that's doing things like voice authentication, uh, that's the kind of thing that is becoming very hard to distinguish anymore today. They're getting very, very good.
Yeah, in my role as content committee chair for the Wall Street Technology Association, one of the things that kept cropping up was the impact that voice audio deepfakes would have on members who have been relying heavily on voice for authentication. And I think a couple things that I want to push on a little bit. One is, deepfakes in the common parlance are simply broadcasts. So somebody's just broadcasting Elvis or whatever. But what we're talking about here is deepfakes that are in some way, shape, or form interacting. So the grandmother asks a question, "How did you get to Italy?" And the audio is able to respond with something that sounds at least semi-legit or plausible. And it also sounds like interactivity is a key thing here for financial services firms. And it also sounds like the real issue here is that FinServ firms are relying on voice and video for authentication. And you're indicating maybe that's not such a great idea.
Yeah, I think that when you're looking at authentication, we really have to do, I guess, what you and I might call hard multi-factor authentication. Somebody's voice, you might think, I recognize their voice and therefore I'm authenticating their voice. That is not a true authentication. You're really talking about system-based, identity management, a hard credential where I'm actually sending a scrambled one-time passcode to your cell phone that you have to have in your possession in order to verify your identity. So it's got to be a lot more than just personal recognition.
Yeah, and I think the issue here is that banks are fooling themselves because they rely on sort of two things, neither of which rises to that level of hard authentication. One is, oh, it appears that the call is coming in from a known number, which, as we all know, is very easy to spoof. And the
Right.
second thing is, oh, I recognize that person's voice. And both of those are now incredibly easy to fake at this point. And, so as you said, you've got to move to real multi-factor authentication. Just on a side note, I mean, I know you and I are both computer science geeks. Would you say that these deep fakes are now passing the Turing test?
Well, it's interesting. We've had a little bit of a debate on this. I believe there was an article back in 2022 that showed that they can pass a what I'm going to call a generic Turing test. If you just have a conversation which is basically a generic "Hi, how are you? How's the weather?" I think they are at the point, especially with what's happening with voice uh, detections, that it's like it sounds really realistic. I'm a little bit more skeptical that you know if somebody's going to push about some intimate detail that truly only me and one other person knows, I think it's would still be very hard for a computer to fake the level of detailed knowledge that's required for, uh, let me say, adult intelligent conversation.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you raised on, when we were talking about this is the whole issue of behavioral analytics. Did you wanna elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. So another thing is, I think you and I have agreed if I were to call on the telephone and it spoofed my number and I said, "Hey, this is Jerry. How you doing, Johna?" And you'd go, "Hey, I'm doing great, Jerry. How are you?" And we talked like that, and we did normal everyday behavior kind of thing. And you're asking me, when are you going to get that article written or something that we might do in a day-to-day course? It might sound like you, and you might think it's me. But if all of a sudden I do something behaviorally that I wouldn't do, hey, John, I really need you to transfer $12,000 into my bank account today. I
I'd
would
be
never
like, "You
ask you
know what,
that.
Jerry? No, I don't think so." Right. Well, so the interesting part on that is my reaction would likely be, "I'm gonna text you to validate that happened." And what's interesting is I see a lot of industries, including banks, relying heavily on text, and yet I think that would be the easiest to fake. So I'm not an expert on text deepfakes, but it would seem to me that that would be step number 1 is make damn sure that you can back up your audio or video deepfake with a text deepfake, and it's so far, we haven't seen that.
Yeah, and I was wondering about this too. It's like I think both of us were a little surprised thinking about why are all these deep fakes around video or voice? Because wow, it's hard to fake my voice or my face, and the answer is no, it's not really. But about text, you almost the text you got to get behavior right because that's the only clue you have is behavior, and because it is hard to actually fake
Interesting.
behavior, maybe that's why you're less likely to see that kind of thing happening in text.
Or maybe we just haven't seen it yet because we haven't caught folks
It's
yet,
getting
so
away. We have noticed how much we're
right.
getting again like that.
So, I guess since we're coming up to the end of FinServ Tech Oracles, what are your recommendations?
Well, my recommendation is you have to use hard two-factor authentication. Trusting somebody's face or voice is something you just cannot trust today. And the other thing I would say is zero trust architectures. Just assume no trust with anything that you're doing and just make that part of your architecture and part of your behavior that you're going to be conducting on a daily basis. Just assume that you have to verify every transaction and every context in order to be safe.
So hard multi-factor authentication, zero trust is a must, and assume that the Turing test is broken. Either it's been broken by the machines or it was not a reliable enough test.
Yeah.
Either way. Okay, well that's it for us until next week.